3 Lives, 3 Worlds, Lotus Steps Book 3. One Step for 1,000 Kalpas. Chapter 13. By Tangqi. Wushuan Hushui Pavilion has been a little quiet these days. Nancy calculated clearly that 4 days had passed since Tianbu hurriedly broke into the water pavilion to report that something happened to the young master in the prince's Fubo palace. At that time, His Highness the Third Prince immediately rushed to Fubo Palace. After taking the young master from Fubo Palace back to Fulan Palace, he set up a barrier outside the palace. He also stayed in the barrier and never came out. He only let Kong Shanla sat at the prince's office. Kong Shanla stayed by the prince's side day and night until the prince woke up and confirmed that the prince was safe. Then he moved to Wushuan Hushui Pavilion and took back Wanyi's medical records from his young disciples. That is to say, in the past 4 days, only Mr. Kongshan and his young disciples have been looking after the place, and His Highness the Third Prince has not appeared even once. There is a table set up by the window of the water pavilion. Wanyu is leaning on the table and reading the book. Nanzi reported softly from the side. His Highness the Third Highness only went out to Fulan Palace the day before yesterday and today. The day before yesterday, His Highness the Crown Prince woke up, and His Highness the Third Highness went out to see the Crown Prince. Today is. Wanner closed the folds in his hand, put them in the pile he had read, took out a new fold, and asked lightly, "What is it today?" Nancy replied with disgust, "I heard from Fairy Tianbu that the young master had no appetite for anything because he was ill. He could only read something made by a pastry shop called Fuxiangzai in the royal city. Mingjing cake. His Highness left the palace early in the morning to buy cake for the young master." Nancy looked at Wanner's expression and saw that she didn't seem to take this matter to heart, so she couldn't help but worry for her. "I feel that His Highness is too fond of the young master. I also heard Fairy Tianbu say that the young master she has been clamoring to return to heaven, and now His Highness the Crown Prince is safe. She estimates that when the young master's body becomes more stable, His Highness the Third Prince will take them back to the 9 heavens. Madam, look at us." There was indeed no expression on Wanner's face, but her right hand that was not holding the document was clenched tightly in her sleeve. After a while, she was able to speak normally. "It doesn't matter. Tomorrow I will go to Fulan Palace to see the young master and chat with His Highness the Third Highness." She paused about the Xingling cave. Tianbu, who was guarding outside the door of Fulan Palace, felt in a trance while holding a large bag of glutinous rice noodles handed to her by Liansong. Tianbu glanced at the glutinous rice flour bag in his hand, and then at His Highness the Third, who was wearing a spotless white robe, and asked him uncertainly, "Your Highness, are you really able to do this?" His Highness the Third was silent and answered slightly conservatively, "When he demonstrated it just now, I memorized every step carefully, so there should be no problem." Tianbu also fell silent. Her Highness is almost an all-powerful highness, but for some reason, His Highness, who is a quick learner of everything, cannot light up the cooking skill tree no matter what. Of course, when His Highness cooks, he will not cook things that poison people like Emperor Donghua of Taichan Palace did. He strictly followed the recipes and timed them carefully with a sand clock, and he was able to make a few dishes that would not poison people, but that was all. Tianbu sighed and asked him sincerely, "Your Highness, although the Mingjing cake needs to be eaten while it's hot to taste better, it's okay for me to invite the pastry master from Fuxiangzai over and let him make it for you on the spot. Isn't it better? It doesn't seem like you need to run out early in the morning to learn it." She couldn't hold back and boldly added, "Your Highness, your performance in this role is, a bit too good." The words Nancy gave to Wanner in Wuxuan Hui Pavilion were not adulterated, they were all true. Those things were revealed by Tianbu this morning to Nancy, who came to inquire about the news secretly. Although His Highness the Third Prince did not explicitly say that he was acting, he did give her instructions before leaving. If Shuij sent someone to inquire, just ask her to answer truthfully, and she could also reveal a few words about their intention to leave. Tianbu is not a fool, and after a brief thought, he will understand the intention of His Highness. His Highness the Third Prince walked towards the palace. What a show! It's just idleness. Tianbu was noncommittal, thinking that whatever you say is what it is. However, as a loyal servant, she still reminded him, "But if, Your Highness, you cannot make the taste that Your Majesty likes." "Well, this is absolutely certain. Your Majesty will be annoyed by then. What will you do?" His Highness the Third Prince said calmly, "Let her do it too. If it goes wrong, will it be my fault alone?" He added, "She should also like doing it more than eating cakes." Tianbu admired His Highness the Third Highness's scheming, but he also had doubts about his last sentence. "But I have never seen you cook before." She may not have any special interest in cooking. His Highness the Third Prince has already entered the barrier. That's because she had other things to play with before. Now that she is detained in this barrier, she must be very bored. Just treat it as a fun. She should be able to do anything she can do. Like, Tianbu was dubious. The two of them turned around the screen wall and suddenly heard a voice exclaiming, "This arrow is beautiful." Liansong paused. That was Yinlin's voice. His Highness the Third Prince looked forward. The spacious land in front of the main hall had been turned into a shooting range at some point. The archery target stood against the red wall. 100 steps away, Zhu Ti was drawing her bow and setting an arrow. The golden skirt and the jet-black hair with no hairpins made the woman's face look as white as transparent. Beautiful, but sick. Such a delicate, frail beauty, and the powerful, heavy bow in front of her that was as tall as a person should have been incompatible. But the beauty, who seemed to be too weak to wear clothes, raised the bow and stretched the bowstring effortlessly. Her wide sleeves fell gracefully to the ground, making the raised heavy bow look less like a weapon and more like a musical instrument. And it matches her perfectly. The arrow shoots and the string rings. The corners of the woman's lips twitched slightly. The new arrow roared out, neatly piercing the original arrow on the bullseye, breaking it in half, and then firmly inserted into the hole where the original arrow was left on the bullseye. Liansong's eyebrows raised slightly. Although he knew that Zhu Ti was good at bowing, he never thought about what it would be like for Zhu Ti to draw a bow. Now he knows. There is no doubt that she is very good with the bow, but to this extent, she is not that outstanding among bow experts. She was probably just bored and just playing around. But her gesture of drawing a bow and shooting an arrow amazed Liansong. Lifting it seems light, picking it up with ease, like a startled roar striking the water. The geese have gone, but the shadow is still there. It is really elegant and beautiful. His Highness the Third Highness could not help but raise his hands and applaud. The woman in the field immediately looked over and saw that it was him. She smiled slightly, handed the heavy bow to Yinlin, and walked over gracefully with her skirt in one hand. When I got closer, I looked up at him slightly, pursed my lips, and said, "Xiao Sanling, Yinlin said that you went to buy me a cake early in the morning. Where's the cake you bought?" The two of them stood under a huge worry-free tree. The crown of the worry-free tree is like an umbrella covering half of the courtyard. The sunlight is scattered, and the light spots are floating like molten gold, creating a graceful scene. His Highness raised his hand and waved, and a stone stove appeared in this charming scene. On the smooth stove, cooking utensils such as steamers, cauldrons, pots, and tables are all available. Zhu Ti glanced at the stove and raised her eyebrows. Today the sky is blue, the clouds are green, and the wind is clear. This is a rare and wonderful place under the worry-free tree. But Xiao Sanlang, you have moved your cooking duties here. It's really... Just as he was talking, Liansong raised his hand and pulled him. She took a step and almost ran into his arms. Out of instinct, she raised her hands in front of her to block him. Although the distance between the two of them was shortened in an instant, they were not as close as if they were breathing. She said in surprise, "You." The young man's fingers touched her hair lightly. A butterfly just stopped here. She was stunned for a moment, then touched the hair with her hand and tilted her head slightly. In the field of vision at the rear right, she saw a colorful butterfly that seemed to be frightened and flew away in shock. Although it flew a little staggeringly, its thin wings, the wings are shining and very beautiful. She watched the colorful butterfly fly away and felt a little regretful. She turned back to look at him and asked softly, half jokingly, Today, I have not put on my makeup and my beaded hair. Finally, a butterfly came to add beauty to me. Why did you put it there? Did it run away in fright? The young man did not reply to her, but took a step forward. Don't move, he said. She felt his hand caressing her hair. The butterfly left a little scale powder on it. After stroking the scale powder on her hair, he replied to her joke in a low voice and nonchalantly, with a bit of caution in his voice. It's just a vulgar thing. That's all, just a vulgar thing. How can it add beauty to you? It was a very low, deep, cool but mellow voice, which sounded above her head and frightened her. She reacted for a while and understood what he meant. Her transparent white cheeks were a little bit red, but her expression was still very stable. Xiao Sanling is worthy of being a famous playboy in Bahuang. Can talk. Then I heard him laugh. Do you think I'm coaxing you? He still whispered, I do have a reputation for being romantic, but you may not know that I never do anything to coax others against my will. She couldn't hold herself steady and was a little helpless. You. The word you came out of her mouth, but she didn't know what she wanted to say or what she could say. When she was little Zitty, she didn't know that he would have such moments. So, what does it look like? Slippery? Frivolous? No, that doesn't seem to be the case. Being frivolous and frivolous are superficial and unpleasant qualities. But when he approached her, said these words, did these things, nothing he said or did made her unhappy. What about me? He asked as he moved away from her a little, looked down at her. She really didn't know how to answer, so she had to push him. Don't get so close to me. She didn't use much force, but he took a few steps back, smiled and shook his head. My temper is still the same. It's very big. But he didn't seem to care. He just took a jade mold from the stone platform and handed it to her. I know you like that cake, but what's the point of buying it ready-made for you to try? So I asked Fu Xiangjai has prepared the ingredients, and we can make them ourselves. Do you want to give it a try? He was so nonchalant and lighthearted that she was slightly stunned. Is it normal for him to get along with women like this? Then, if she cares about it, wouldn't it be too stingy? Thinking of this, she suppressed her thoughts, took the mold, looked at the big stove, and smiled as if nothing had happened. So you moved the kitchen to such a wonderful place for this purpose, which is quite interesting. Tianbu and Yinlin were standing quite far away, so they couldn't hear what they said, but they could clearly see the commotion they made. Tianbu breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that His Highness the Third Highness and God Zhu Ti finally separated, keeping a safe distance and making cakes together. She sincerely thanked Yinlin beside her. Thank you very much, Your Majesty. Yinlin was confused. Thank me for what? Tianbu hesitated. To be honest, when His Highness approached Your Majesty, I was very afraid that Your Majesty would suddenly run over and hit him. She coughed slightly. Your Majesty did not come over, so I want to thank Your Majesty. Yinlin was even more confused. If our Lord didn't like him coming closer, he would have beaten him himself. What does it have to do with me? Tianbu was dumbfounded. After thinking about it, he felt that this was the truth and he felt enlightened. Rice flour is the main ingredient for making Mingjing cake. The dim sum master at Fu Xiangjai has already steamed the glutinous rice flour. All Yansong and Zhu Ti need to do now is to fill the steamed rice flour into the mold, then decorate it with jam to make some patterns, and then put the mold into place. Put it in a steamer and steam it for a long time. However, there are techniques for filling glutinous rice noodles. Filling it too loosely or too solidly will affect the taste. The Third Highness reminded Zhu Ti twice, but seeing that she still couldn't find the answer, he was pleased that she was as untalented in cooking as he was, so he didn't remind her again. The reason why he invited her to make cakes today was not to help her make a basket of good cakes. The grown-up and beautiful Ziti god in front of me is sensitive and thoughtful, but also wise and cunning. Of course she was close to him, but she was not as dependent on him as little Ziti. He still remembered that after she woke up the day before yesterday, he asked her what her plans were for the evil power of the Western Emperor blade in her body. If it were Xiao Ziti, of course she would immediately tell him everything without reservation. But she wouldn't and didn't. At that time, She propped up her chin and looked away as if she didn't want to talk about the matter in depth. I want to find someone, but the matter is not complicated, so I won't bother you, Kosaburo. You also have others in the Bluebird clan. Thing. She didn't want to say anything, and she couldn't get anything out if she asked again. The Third Highness knew how to speak well, so he did not ask her more, but turned the topic to himself. Oh? You know again, what can I do? She fiddled with the pearls embroidered on the pillow, and. She only said 2 words, thought about it, and then said, forget it, I just guessed at random. Maybe I guessed wrong. In a word, the truly effective message is nothing more than the words and. The words are not finished, but they have profound meaning. He was always keen, and after thinking for a moment, he remembered what she had said to him in an angry tone when she had just recovered. She said that Xiao Zudi thought he didn't want to care about her because of Wanner, and was very angry, so she chose to perform magic to help the prince. Then she disappeared. Until the moment she disappeared, she was still angry with him. There are indeed many differences between little Zudi and Zudi at this time, but their emotions have always been the same. At that time, Zhu specifically told him about this matter. In addition to wanting to make him feel guilty, she must also be concerned about this matter. After he understood those 2 words, what she really wanted to say. What she wanted to say was him and Wanner. But Wanner's matter was a bit complicated. He considered it for a moment and told her tactfully. You want to talk about Wanner and me? There is no personal matter between Wanner and me. If this is what you guessed, then you are indeed wrong. I can't tell whether she believes it or not. She smiled as if she believed it. She said, okay, I understand. After thinking for a while, she said to him as if discussing, then I won't ask you about this matter. Who am I going to find? Don't ask Kosaburo either, okay? It's like she didn't believe it at all. She breathed a sigh of relief. After all, when Emperor Donghua comes out of confinement, I will go to your 9th heaven. She seemed a little bored. I don't have a clue about some things now. If I talk to others randomly, I might lead everyone astray. Just wait, okay? The adult god Zudi is extremely determined and independent. All he could say was yes. That day, their conversation ended here, because the next moment, Kongshan Lao's medicine boy came to report that the prince had woken up, and he left to see the prince. Because he roughly understood her plan, he told the prince to escort her back to Gugu. If she had other plans, she would follow her. Regarding the matter of deriving the evil power of the Western Emperor's blade from her body, she didn't want him to interfere, so he wouldn't, but there was something else he wanted to ask her. Today he brought glutinous rice noodles and invited her to make cakes together, just to lower her guard and allow him to ask her what he wanted to ask. Press the glutinous rice flour into a mold, paint it with jam on it, put it in a steamer and steam it out, and you will have the beautiful Mingjing cake. After Zhu finished painting, she turned her head and saw the Jiangmi mold in Lian Song's hand. She was surprised and said, "Why did you draw the same pattern as me?" Zhu painted a red lotus, and Lian Song also painted a red lotus. Perhaps because we are destined, we always think of going together? His Highness, who was painting the lotus stamens with honey, replied, "Didn't you also say that we are destined?" Oh, by the way, he finished the last stroke of the lotus stamen and looked up at her, as if he had just remembered this. Your divine envoy Yin Lin also said that we had something special in the past. A special fate. Yin Lin's original words that day were, "You and her are very destined. If this is God's will." But he relayed the words this way, not because he couldn't remember Yin Lin's original words that day. He did it on purpose, just to deceive her. The movements of Zhu Tiai's hands stopped as expected, and her expression was a little surprised and confused. Extra special fate? His Highness the Third Prince put the completed rice cake mold into the basket and wiped his hands slowly with a white silk handkerchief. Yes, that's what he said. He answered her calmly and said, "Yes, that's what he said." Speaking of which, I also want to know what kind of special fate we had in the past, do you know? Zhu frowned and thought for a moment. How do I remember that we had no intersection before? Oh, I understand. She suddenly smiled. Lin should be referring to the person I used to be. I look forward to your birth and think about it with all my heart. His Royal Highness paused for a moment. He folded the silk handkerchief, put it aside, and then looked at her. Is that just it? Yes. The woman's eyes were clear, and there was nothing concealed or concealed. Everything she said was true. This explanation of Lin's words does make sense, but this answer is not the answer that His Highness expected to get. But then again, what kind of answer does he hope to get? He actually hadn't thought about it in detail. Maybe he really thought too much. He felt a little disappointed, but he didn't know what he was disappointed about. After all, what's there to be disappointed about? His Highness was distracted for a moment. He was only distracted for a moment, but Zhu Ti seemed to sense it. Sometimes she's really sharp. The slender body came closer to him. She raised her head slightly, her eyes half confused and half worried, and asked him, Xiao Sanling, are you unhappy? What are you unhappy about? His Highness was startled for a moment. I'm not unhappy. He quickly calmed down and answered her. In order to make this answer convincing enough, he added, I was just thinking that you had said before that you were looking forward to my birth. Why do you expect me to be born? She seemed to believe that he was really just confused about this issue. Oh, this. She reached for a basket and imitated what he had just done, placing the painted rice cake mold in the middle of the basket. You were born really late, she murmured, and then asked him, Is this how you put it? There's something wrong with the angle. His Highness the Third Prince helped her put the cage on the steamer. What happens next? He asked her. Then? There was no then. It was just that in the old god era more than 200,000 years ago, among the 5 nature gods, the Mother of Earth, the Lord of Wind, the God of Light, and the God of Fire were all born, but you, the God of Water, were not born. She looked up. He smiled and said, The only unborn nature god, isn't it worth looking forward to? He looked back at her. Is it just like this? Today, he used this question for the second time. But this time, her eyes were no longer so clear and innocent. She looked away, as if thinking about something. After a while, she transformed into a jade table and 2 jade stools a few steps away, walked over, sat down on a jade stool and said, I'm a little tired, let's sit down and talk. His Highness also sat down opposite her. Do you know how Xieming was born? She asked him. Today is indeed a good day, with clear sky and clear air and a gentle breeze. It is a good time to make tea and drink it. Tianbu was very discerning, and when he saw the jade table that Zhu Ti had transformed into, he served tea. His Highness the Third Prince took the black jade teapot, poured a cup of tea for Zhu Ti, and also poured a cup for himself. Historical records state that there's a fire pool on the top of Dangbei Mountain in Nanwang, and the first fire in the world is stored in the fire pool, the original fire. The fire pool is guarded by a ferocious black snake. Since the beginning of the Hameng, the original fire has been burning in the fire pool. More than 300,000 years after Pangu and Father God created the world, the fire pool of bright pearl was born in it. The mulberry fields changed, the years passed, and one day, the original fire in the fire pool was extinguished. After the original fire naturally extinguished, the pearl shattered, and Xieming was born from the pearl. For the god of fire. Zhu Ti was slightly startled. Is this recorded in your history books? It's not like this. She corrected softly, You are right about the previous part, but the original fire does not extinguish naturally. She fell into memories. The voice was a little ethereal. In the 700 years after the pearl appeared in the fire pool, Sergia, the Lord of Wind, who was more than 20,000 years old and still a child, went to the fire pool, fought with his life, and protected it with his hand. The ferocious black snake in the pool obtained the pearl. Because the pearl left the fire pool, the original fire in the fire pool was extinguished, and the pearl shattered into Sergia's arms. Xieming was born from then on. After the tea in the cup was gone, His Highness played with the mysterious jade cup. It's like this. It seems that the history books of our god clan are not very reliable. Well, your history books are indeed unreliable. She agreed with his joke and sighed softly. I saw all that in my precognitive dream. According to the laws of nature, Xianming should indeed be like yours. She was born as recorded in the history books. However, Sergia broke the natural laws and caused her to give birth prematurely. But you can't blame Sergia. He did this just to find a relative for himself to rely on. His Highness the Third Highness raised his eyebrows. A relative who can stay with me? Zhu Ti was quiet for a moment, then half-cupped her chin and asked him, Xiao Sanling, how do you record the birth of Sergia in the history books of your god clan? His Highness the Third Highness was still playing with the mysterious jade cup and smiled. It feels like I am back to the time when I was questioned by the master in the ancient history class. After teasing this sentence, he replied to her, in the ocean of chaos that has disappeared now, there was once a life that was born. This lotus is a very special lotus. This lotus has only one flower, but it has two flowers. One is the big white lotus Spengioligia, which is filled with white color and has clear divine nature. The other flower is the small white lotus Zumidihua, which is rich in green color. The demonic nature is majestic. One god and one demon are actually brothers, born together in the same tree, which is unprecedented. The god is Shilua, the lord of the western Brahma realm, and the demon is Sergia, the lord of wind. Master, this time are our history books reliable? Are their records accurate? She was amused by him. Well, you finally got it right about the life experiences of Shilua and Sergia. She continued, Shilua and Sergia, two brothers who depended on each other for life. When Sergia was young, she admired and relied on Shilua. However, the way of heaven was obscure. It was already a period of war between the five races, and the gods and demons were at odds with each other. So when Sergia was 14,000 years old, he was expelled by the gods, but Shilua failed to save him. At that time, Sergia was in a very difficult situation. The gods expelled him, and the demons did not accept him. The world is so big, only he was lonely. He hated the gods and Shilua, but he was afraid of loneliness and longed for family affection, so he vowed to find a relative for himself who would never betray him. In the end, he chose the god of fire. He stole it from the black snake, the pearl that gave birth to Xianming. Sergia was still a child at that time. She tried her best to kill the mysterious snake protecting the pond. She was also dying. Xianming was born next to him, wrapped in his blood. I saw it in my precognitive dream. After all this, Father Tangqi was invited to rescue him. After Xiao Heyuan recovered from his injuries, the first thing he did was to tell Xianming, who was also a baby, to make a bone-gnawing mantra. Although the two of them did not, they are related by blood, but Sergia treats Xianming better than she treats her own sister, and she is even closer to her. After telling the story about Sergia and Xianming, she was quiet for a long time. After a while, she raised her eyes to look at Liansong and asked him, Do you think it's strange that I'm telling you this? She smiled as if she was mocking herself. You may be thinking why I'm telling you this. I don't think so, and I don't think it's strange either. The young man answered her. He looked at her quietly. She didn't quite understand what was in his eyes, because those beautiful amber eyes were always like a pool of secluded springs, making it difficult for people to understand. But at this time, she was reflected gently in this mysterious, secluded spring. Face. She froze. The young man said to her warmly, At that time, you were alone in Gugu. You envied Sergia for having Xianming as his companion, so you also looked forward to my birth so that you could be your companion, right? These words made her startled again. How do you? She wanted to ask, How do you know? Didn't explain it so clearly. How did you hear it? But before the question was asked, she already understood the answer. There is only one answer, because he is smart, sharp, and has first-rate observation, insight, and reasoning skills. She has seen this many times. Thinking of this, she could only smile, but the smile on her face was a little forced. You guessed it, that's it. But you can't say that I envy Sergia, because I didn't understand the 7 emotions at that time. She frowned and thought for a moment, and then came up with an explanation. I just think that if I can find a Xianming to be my companion like Sergia, that would be great. but if I can't find one, it seems like that's it. I am not as persistent as Sergia, I have no persistence. But I, who have no persistence, have been looking forward to your birth. This time she smiled sincerely. This can indeed be regarded as a special bond between you and me. Now, she changed her hand to support her chin. I heard from Lin that I am very concerned about you. Not only when I was a child, I also paid close attention to your news as an adult. Until the eve of the Ruoma gate opening, I also paid close attention to you. Looking forward to your birth. The third prince's eyebrows moved slightly. I see. He was silent for a moment, then smiled softly and asked her, "Why did you hear Lin say that you can't remember that you have been thinking about me?" At first, saying she was tired was an excuse, but after talking for a long time, she was indeed tired. She leaned her whole body against the jade table, and her voice unconsciously became lower and softer. I have sacrificed once and been reincarnated in the mortal world many times. These experiences are harmful to my soul, so I can't talk about the past. Many of my memories are very vague. She answered him, and then asked him half-consciously, "How long will this cake be steamed?" He glanced at the sand clock next to the jade table. "It will take another half-quarter of an hour." She said, and thought for a while. "Then I'll go to the palace to rest for a while. When the cake is ready, you can call me." She stood up, but fell a little. He stretched out his hand to support her. This time, he didn't make any overstepping moves that confused her. He helped her in a polite manner, and after she stood firmly, he let her go in a polite manner, and allowed her to go back to the palace alone, instead of accompanying her back as thoughtfully as he had done before. He stayed alone under the worry-free tree. Under the worry-free tree, the breeze blew by, and the light smoke on the steamer swayed, like a piece of yarn that was flying away. Behind the thin veil of smoke, the young man looked at the beauty's leaving figure from a distance. Although his face was calm as usual, only he knew what was in his heart. Zidi said that her memory about the past is a bit fuzzy. Is there something hidden in her vague memories? Of course, it's also possible that he's overthinking it again. Forget it. Let's wait until the Star Order cave is opened. He sees the four realm beasts and resolves his doubts about himself before he can delve into it further. The young man rubbed his forehead and thought so. End of chapter 13, book 3.